My story begins a few weeks before to my move into a new home and concludes on the day I left. Because, in actuality, there are instances when there are no explanations for why a property is the way it is. These are my experiences over my 5 years of living in what I consider to be a haunted house. It all began in 2000 when my sister and I were seated by our parents to announce that we would be moving once more. I was accustomed to this dialogue as an army brat. After being informed of our relocation's date and location, we were given a picture of the house. Though I didn't question it, I was a little perplexed as an army brat with 2 retired army parents as to why we had to relocate so abruptly in the middle of the school year. Moving was the norm for my family, despite how strange it may appear to those who have lived in the same home their entire lives. A part of me hoped that this would be the last move and that we would eventually find a permanent house, as was the case with every move. It wasn't until I actually visited the house that I decided to get off the hype train, and boy, was I eager to do so. Really, I threw myself out the window. It was transient by nature, for starters, because it was a rental property. More significantly, though, the place looked awful. I recall a newspaper lying on the kitchen floor, directly beneath a low-hanging, yellowish light fixture that was pouring water. The previous tenant had used multicolored crayons to write suicide-related lyrics on the walls of my black-painted bedroom. I was really frightened out at the time, even though I now find it funny to think of some emo kid drawing with wax crayons. The entire house was as dusty as an attic, the ceiling appeared wet, and the steps creaked. It was unbelievable to me that my parents had chosen this location. We weren't a desperate, impoverished family, rather. We were a typical middle-class family. We were relocating to this den of dirt and grime from a beautiful semi-detached house with a swimming pool. As if all of that wasn't awful enough, I then learned that the prior tenants had simply moved out. After neglecting the maintenance and withholding rent for months, they abruptly vanished one day, taking all they owned with them. They were never located by the owner. So, yes, we had a terrific start. The day we moved in was the next time I saw the house, and happily, it had significantly improved. The owner had cleaned up the dirt, replaced the leaking light fixture, and painted the entire house white. The laundry area at the base of the basement stairs was the only space that still caused me discomfort. I would always get a spooky vibe when I entered. You know, when you turn around and see nobody there, yet you can still sense someone breathing down your neck. Every time I walked downstairs, I would generally run past the door because it was so awful. And just in case I had to walk inside, I would prop the door open with my leg. So yes, the house was first quite normal except for the laundry room. Sure, I would occasionally hear odd noises, but these were simply the sounds of water flowing through the pipes and the house sinking. Adjusting to a new home always takes some time, but eventually the sound of the walls fracturing and cracking becomes insignificant. They are only noises that you only become aware of when you are unfamiliar with an area. During the first few weeks, a flushing toilet would wake me up in the middle of the night, but after that, I was able to sleep through it with ease. Our animal brains are attempting to keep us vigilant in a new situation when they are unsure of potential dangers, which is, in my opinion, just a survival instinct. If I had to choose one night a few months after we moved in and long after I had gotten used to the new house's noises, I would say that's when everything changed. What most people don't know about me is that I can't play the ukulele, and I'm only as good at falling asleep as I am at playing it. I go between being completely awake, being slightly sleepy, and then abruptly falling asleep. No matter how tired I am or how late I go to bed, the process takes more than an hour every night. Like all other school nights, I went to bed at 10 that night with the intention of falling asleep at 11. I was awake when I heard a knock at my bedroom door, which was different from the sounds my brain had become used to ignoring. I wasn't sure how long I had been asleep. That knock was followed by a man's voice. "Are you sleeping?" he inquired. I rolled onto my side and said, "Mim?" "No." He went on. "Give me access." "Dad?" With my eyes still closed, I asked. "May I enter?" The voice inquired. Who else could it have been, even if it didn't sound like my dad? "All right," I said. After hearing soft footfall coming my way, I felt a weight on the bed that resembled a parent's hand leaning in to kiss you goodnight. I realized then that I hadn't heard the door open. When I opened my eyes, I noticed a figure standing above me. I remember him well. He had heavy eyebrows, an old face, a big crooked nose, pitch black hair, and a look of scorn. Even though there hadn't been a single cloud in the sky that night, I could see him so clearly that it seemed like the lightning had illuminated my room. The black jacket he wore was the last thing I saw before my gaze briefly shifted to my lamp. I was sweating, and he was gone by the time I turned on the light and turned to look behind me. My gaze strayed to the timepiece. If it had been a dream, if I had been asleep at the time, 10 past 10 would have been the fastest time I had ever fallen asleep. It was the first of several odd things that happened that night. I was hiding in the basement, surfing the web on a sweltering summer day. I had promised myself that I would do nothing at all during my summer break after my freshman year of high school. At approximately 3:45 p.m., I heard the front door open. I believed it to be just in time. My dad was coming home from work, of course. He worked an earlier shift to escape rush hour traffic because he was an early riser. As usual, I went up the stairs to greet them. "Hey, Dad," I yelled as I bounded up the steps. He didn't respond. It was vacant when I turned the corner and went down the hallway that led to the door. I knew he had returned home since the door was unlocked. I created this small floor plan to attempt to help you follow along, because this is when things become a little difficult. The first floor essentially looped around in an open rectangle with the stairs going up in the middle, if you are unable to click the link. The hallway I had just left, as well as a portion of the stairs leading to the second level, were visible from the mirror that stood between the front entrance and the garage door. I saw my father's figure in the mirror after phoning him another time. It really isn't hard for him to be standing behind me in the hallway. All he would have needed to do was go around the living room, through the dining room and kitchen, and then into the hallway where I was standing. The only peculiarity was how silently he had accomplished it. I turned around and grinned once again. "How was your day, by the way?" I quickly recognized that the figure was up the stairs rather than in the hallway. I thought it was just an optical illusion. However, Dad's avoidance of the recognizable shriek made by the third step was not explained by an optical illusion. The classic sound of a person heading upstairs. I became aware that something strange was happening at that point. "Dad?" I repeated my question, but I had to speak more quietly. No response. The shadowy figure disappeared and made its way to my parents' chamber. My entire body was screaming for me to leave. Every warning sign was screaming, "Danger, danger." But I didn't pay attention. I heard the front door. I could definitely see a man in the house, and it was precisely when my dad normally got home. My body was alerting me that something strange was happening. But aside from him disregarding my welcome, there was no reason to suspect it. After sprinting up the second-story stairs, I peered into my parents' room and noticed the outline of a hand moving from their dresser in the direction of their walk-in closet. The hand gave my brain the boost it needed to catch up to whatever danger signals my body was sending out, though I'm not really sure why. I simply recall thinking Dad before realizing it was a burglary. It's such a strange thing, isn't it? Just a helping hand. If you gave me a lineup of random hand images, I doubt I could identify my dad's hand. Although it's not the goal, I would probably think you were a little strange for caring about so many pictures of hands to try the experiment in the first place. The point is that I no longer felt secure. I swiftly withdrew into my room and grabbed one of my numerous ornamental swords. Sharp but ornamental, I carefully closed my door without making too much noise after taking the firearm out of its sheath. It was either fight or flight, and I was going to fight, for crying out loud. Although it sounds ridiculous to me now that I didn't call 911, this was before everyone had a cell phone and the only telephone upstairs was in my parents' room. I couldn't have just walked in there and called without being discovered. Instead, I waited and listened while standing in my room with shaky hands. His footsteps echoed up and down the corridor, and then I heard a voice that was a little muffled. There were intervals in between, as if the other person was anticipating my response, but I didn't. I assumed it was a phone caller's response. Despite my best efforts to listen, I was unable to understand a word he was saying. To whom was he speaking? Was he aware of my location? I ought not to have called out so frequently. He was aware that he was not alone in the house, of course. Would he pursue me? My ears thumped and my heart hammered in my chest. As foolish as I wasn't foolish enough to move, even though I could feel the excitement pumping through me. I decided to wait where I was safer. I assumed my real dad would return home shortly. Then, however, there was silence. I walked cautiously to my bedroom door and listened intently, but the footsteps had stopped and the voice was no longer there. The house appeared to be deserted once more. I waited longer to be sure. And my goodness, it seemed to go on forever. It did, at least when I was a teenager. I opened the door slightly and peered out into the hallway, unsure of what to do. Something would have jumped in front of the door at that very time if I were in a horror film, but nothing happened. I emerged from my hiding place and proceeded cautiously around each room, unlocking each door to check for the intruder. Again, this was a really dumb thing to do, and I should have contacted the police right away, but I wasn't immune to teenage bluster, and we all know that teenagers don't always make the best judgments in life. All the rooms were unoccupied, which was fortunate for me and my ongoing life in the cosmos. I was shaken and confused, so I sat at my computer with my sword on my lap till my dad called my name 20 minutes later and the door opened. He gave me that strange look daddies give you when they see you doing something that isn't quite your age when I ran upstairs brandishing my sword. I have no idea what he believed I was doing with it. Most likely believed that I was pretending or something. To put it briefly, he had been stuck in traffic. After I informed him about the burglar, we checked each room one by one. Nothing unusual had happened, and nothing had been stolen. And to be honest, I still don't know if that was a relief or something scarier. After all, if my dad hadn't unlocked the front door, then who had? I know what I saw that day, and I know someone was in the house. Strange occurrences occurred outside of my home as well. The entire area had an unsettling vibe. When my buddies visited, we would go for nighttime hikes in the nearby woods to try out that adolescent bluster I had previously mentioned. Every time there was a sound, my pals would alternately yell and cling to my arms. They claimed to feel secure in my presence. I'm not sure if it was because I just felt so safe or because I had informed them about the strange things that had happened to me and how I managed to survive in my home. After skating in the park one evening, my friend and I were making our way back to my house on foot. We took the dimly illuminated lane that led from the main road to the residential neighborhood, which was a shortcut behind an outdoor mall. Although it had a rather eerie appearance, it was not dangerous. The walkway, which was only about 25 meters long, was hardly the sort of spot where a psycho killer would go to follow his victim. I took a moment to glance up at the sky as we began our journey along the snowy road. There were no clouds or stars to be seen anywhere, and it was completely dark. It seemed incredibly strange to me for some reason. Every time I passed the laundry room, I would get that shiver down the back of my spine. I remarked, "Weird, it's too dark." A huge icicle that was hanging from a tree approximately 20 meters in front of us was knocked off balance by a blast of wind that arrived almost immediately after I finished speaking. It was a couple of feet long and as sharp as a knife, so when I say massive, I mean it. These days, there are cautions about falling ice near structures since it's dangerous, you know. Imagine, then, that this icicle is 3 times larger than the ones you should be on the lookout for. Now picture it being out for goddamn blood, as in a cheesy B-list film. You see, instead of descending elegantly, this monster defied gravity and headed straight for my companion and me. She let out a yell and seized me so tightly that I almost lost consciousness. This object, which might have easily pierced our winter jackets, came hurtling toward us so fast that we couldn't have fled even if we had wanted to, leaving us both petrified. It then turned quickly to the right and plunged into the ground like an arrow when it got within 2 feet of us, or around the distance of my personal bubble. I'm not making this up, I promise. To this day, my friend continues to discuss it. The icicle was approaching us one moment, and then it suddenly turned 90 degrees. Hell, I could have been positive I saw it reflecting off of something if I hadn't known any better. I can kind of picture something there in front of us, like the sheen of a window or something, every time I think back to that night, because I have a photographic memory. Then, while we were gasping for air, I caught a glimpse of the man in the black coat standing beneath the tree, simply standing there and looking at us. I glanced at my pal as my stomach churned. She continued to gaze at the snow-covered icicle. The man was gone by the time I turned to face the tree once more. The house itself would occasionally experience strange events. Everyone in my family could see the objects that were appearing on the walls, but I was the only one who could actually see a man in a black coat hanging around. To be more precise, I suddenly spotted something one day close to the light switch at the base of the basement steps. Indeed, on the other wall from the laundry room. With the crimson crayon, it resembled a bloody handprint. Although my sister and I were really well behaved and neither of us would have done anything like this, I'm not claiming that we were flawless little angels. We did this in part because we were considerate of other people's property and in part because our mother would have insisted that we clean it up no matter how much time it took. I vividly recall a lengthy discussion about drawing on the walls and how we may do it if we so desired. However, she was unaware of any simple methods for removing crayons from the wall and refused to assist us with cleaning if we let our inner artist loose. With the menacing severity of a mother, she had uttered those words back then, and mark my words, "You will clean it." I knew my sister hadn't sketched the handprint because of this. I pulled her downstairs to show her because of this. This was not present previously, was it? I inquired. It was likely that I had been oblivious to it the entire time. Curious, my sister ran a hand over it. The handprint was significantly larger than her hand, as I recall. The fingers were longer and thicker, as if they belonged to a man who had reached adulthood. A sinking sensation came to the pit of my stomach. No, she responded, it wasn't. I had to ask, did you draw it even though she appeared to be as snagged by the mark as I was? No, she answered. Before we came in, wasn't your room completely covered with crayon? I gave a nod. Indeed, even if the paint is scraped, the color remains visible. Once more, she massaged her hand against the handprint. That's most likely what took place here. Something wore off the paint. Yes,